Now, the other day in my review for the most recent episode of The Bad Batch, and don't worry, there will be no spoilers of any kind in this video if you're not caught up. Anyway, the other day in my review, I talked about my concern not only for the future of the series, a series I've been enjoying, but for the future of Star Wars animation in general, and mainly the Clone Wars style of animation many of us fans have come to know and love. And as I assumed there would be, there were some in the comments who said I was just being an alarmist or I was being way too critical and to just relax and enjoy the show for what it is, that not every episode needs to be fantastic. But here's the thing about that. The episodes do need to be pretty fantastic. They need to have good audience retention week in and week out, because there's going to be someone or someone's far more critical of how the show is doing or how it's performing or what the viewership is than I am. And that's of course Disney and Lucasfilm. And before even going on, I should point out that Season 2 has not yet been confirmed, though I should also point out that, as far as I can recall, we never were told in the first place there would be a second season or multiple seasons. Though I'd have to imagine that is the intent, to go multiple seasons, I mean, and the reason why they didn't say as much is because, well, if it fails and it gets cancelled after one season, they can just pretend that was the plan all along, which is also why I think this season will have a rather definitive end for pretty much all the ongoing storylines, though one that still can of course be continued. And something just like this happened with the series Star Wars Resistance, which got cancelled after 2 seasons, and they told us, well, that was the plan all along, even though they didn't mention that beforehand for some odd reason, which sure is possible, but I have a hard time believing they spend all that time and money on creating assets for a series and don't write it out for longer, unless it wasn't getting the viewership, which it probably wasn't, and that's why it really was cancelled. And I have to, or will say probably a lot here, because it's very hard to get concrete numbers about, well, any of this. Disney Plus doesn't release internal viewership numbers, and only the top few shows, or like the top 10 streaming shows overall across all platforms, get announced usually, and no, Bad Batch does not finish in the top 10. We also don't know the cost of any of this, or how much an episode, start to finish, of The Bad Batch costs to produce. And when it comes to the Clone Wars animated series that started in 2008, we've heard that the show actually lost money, that it cost at least $1 million per episode to produce, and may have been upwards of $2 million to produce, if maybe not even more for some episodes. And the only reason it lasted as long as it did and would have kept going is because George Lucas basically funded it himself. He ate the losses because it was sort of a pet project and he just wanted to make it and didn't care as much about profit, which is easy to do when you own the company and you're already a billionaire. Disney, on the other hand, reports to shareholders who will not be so kind or generous. They will not keep it running out of the goodness of their heart if the numbers aren't there. And again, we can't even be 100% sure of what the numbers are. We don't even know what Disney expects from the show in the first place. We don't know what they will view as success or failure, much less, again, what those numbers even are. The best we can do is extrapolate from other sources of information or evidence to try and figure out how this show is doing, which leads to a lot of conjecture, I will admit. And for all we know, it's doing great and Disney is very happy and the numbers they're seeing are fantastic. And any day now, Season 2 will be announced and everything will be fine. However, the numbers some have dug up don't really say as much. When we look at something like Google Trends, which isn't any sort of perfect metric to determine success, well, it doesn't look too good there. Looks like there was, no surprise, a spike right after the first episode aired, and it's been all downhill since, and pretty quickly. This coincides with what I've personally seen in viewership on my own review videos. Huge interest in that first episode, and it's been dwindling ever since. There's also people who have been looking at multiple other Star Wars channels and similar channels who report on this sort of thing, and they too have seen similar dwindling interest in views on their review videos or any other news on the show. Then there's also rumors out there that Disney is not happy with the numbers, which I don't put too much stock into, since rumors have a very odd way of confirming or conforming with what the person reporting them already wants to be true. And look, to be very clear, I'm not talking about all this because I want the show to fail. Quite the opposite. I've been pleasantly surprised by how much I'm enjoying The Bad Batch. I wasn't sure about it when it first got announced. I even questioned, why would you make an entire series around The Bad Batch of all characters? And well, the answer to that, I think, has a lot to do with Season 7 of the Clone Wars, which from all indicators was a huge success on Disney+. I mean, it came out a little over a month after season 1 of The Mandalorian, which we know was a huge success. Disney has said as much. And thanks to the buzz and all the excitement and all the attention for that, season 7 also attracted, or season 7 of The Clone Wars also attracted a lot of attention. And I'm assuming many people or fans who had never really seen the previous episodes or seasons of The Clone Wars tuned in. And what did the first episode of that season involve? Well, it involved The Bad Batch. Which is unlikely to be a coincidence. It's unlikely to be a coincidence that the name of the next animated series is something everyone who watched season 7 of The Clone Wars and maybe liked it out of nowhere or had never seen it before again would then be familiar with, letting them know this is a sort of continuation of season 7 of The Clone Wars. I fully believe that played a huge factor in the naming of the show. And I do think it sort of worked, at first anyway. I think a lot of people who watched and enjoyed season 7 of Clone Wars, and again, maybe they hadn't seen previous seasons of the show, gave The Bad Batch a chance. And that first episode did indeed seem to draw some pretty big attention. But all indicators, and again, these are not perfect metrics, say the interest has dropped like a rock, which is very concerning, again, not only for the future of this particular series, but the future of Star Wars animation at this quality level. Because no, it's not cheap to pull off a show that looks this good, and for 16 episodes on top of that, going off what we've heard Clone Wars cost to produce, and mind you, the animation style looks better than ever with The Bad Batch, so that means the price could have gone up, or maybe it's just been perfected and simplified, and the price has gone down. But anyway, let's just say it costs around $2 million an episode. That would mean season 1 of The Bad Batch had 16 episodes, and the first one was double length, could cost around $35 million to produce. And yeah, I could be dead wrong with that number. It might be much, much lower, or it could even be higher. Either way, it's not going to be cheap, which means it needs numbers to justify its continued existence. And if the show fails, and I'm not saying it is or will, Disney and Lucasfilm are going to be very, very hesitant about pulling the trigger on another animated show at this quality level. In fact, I would say this show, or this season of it, is sort of a test run to see the long-term viability of this format. I think the question is, can The Bad Batch break the sort of stigma some have around animated shows being cartoons? And you watching this video as someone who maybe loved Clone Wars and maybe loves this show, and perhaps enjoyed Rebels too, and maybe even Resistance, you might laugh at that. It might even irk you a little bit that some people call Clone Wars a cartoon. But I personally know people who are Star Wars fans who will not watch Clone Wars because they think it is a cartoon, and I have damn near pleaded with them to just give it a chance, but they won't. And so anyway, I think again, The Bad Batch, this first season, is a sort of trial run to see the viability or profitability of this style of animation long term. Can they justify pouring this type of money into a quote-unquote cartoon? And one thing the show doesn't have going for it, that Clone Wars absolutely did, was a very, very healthy toy line. Clone Wars toys from the show's start to its finish were numerous and everywhere. Toys for The Bad Batch, besides those intended for collectors, are virtually non-existent, though that could be more of a commentary on the times, the death of kids playing with action figures, more than an indicator of the success or failure of the show. Either way, it is one less revenue stream to help justify the continued existence of the series. As for what I've personally seen by reading through thousands of comments on my reviews for the episodes, well, mostly people seem to enjoy it, but there is this increasing desire for something to happen in the series, which I understand and do pretty much agree with. I know there is always this argument or debate over what we are calling filler episodes, and as I've said before, in theory, not every episode needs to move the story ahead in leaps and bounds. Some can be great or enjoyable just in and of themselves. Or at least that's how it used to be. In recent years, for better or worse, as more and more streaming options pop up and compete with each other, what many people expect from a show or series has changed dramatically. They now do mostly expect better, more streamlined experiences and grand overarching stories that progress at a good pace. And so, to be blunt about it, and again, I like The Bad Batch. I want to see it succeed. Oftentimes, criticism comes from a place of wanting to see improvement. Anyway, and unfortunately, you could say, I don't think the old formula is going to work with The Bad Batch. The formula of having many filler episodes and a very slow-moving, overarching story. Now, you could certainly say or argue Mandalorian was a bit of a slow burn and had its fair share of filler-ish episodes too, and it still worked and worked well. And I would basically agree with you, but as I talked about before, this series, The Bad Batch, has the added disadvantage, you could say, for a lack of a better way of putting it, of being animated, and some people just not wanting to give it a chance or being reluctant about giving it a chance or giving it a very small window to be entertained by. And so if they watch a couple episodes that don't do much for the overall story, that don't keep them engaged, and instead make it feel like some sort of standard cartoon formula they may remember from when they were kids, well, they will quickly tune out and watch one of a million other shows out there, and maybe on a different platform, which of course Disney does not want. And I'm not saying that's what The Bad Batch is. I'm not saying it's some old formula of cartoons of the past. I'm saying that's what they might see it as, and it seems pretty clear some people are. So then, what can The Bad Batch do to change that, to draw in and keep an audience? Well, I don't want to get too much into it here. This has already been a pretty long video, so maybe I'll do a separate one about this. But oddly enough, one of the presumed strengths of the show, and I do think it is a strength somewhat, might actually be one of its weaknesses in a way, which is that it is a show that finds itself in a sort of neutral zone between being made for adults and being made for kids. Which, again, in a way is a good thing. I think Star Wars should be family entertainment. But the question then has to be, are you luring in more younger viewers or alienating more adult viewers with The Bad Batch and the way you're going about it? And I'm not saying the show should go full on adult, and I don't mean that in a way it might sound, but I do think we sometimes underestimate what kids will watch, enjoy, and understand. I mean, I'm 43 right now. Most of my friends are also in that same sort of age bracket, and they almost all have kids that range anywhere in age from 5 to 20. And I always do love to ask them what their kids think about Star Wars these days, or what they are watching or into in general. And they're always happy to tell me because they think I'll mention them in a video, which I never do. Sorry, guys. Anyway, with a lot of them, and yes, this is anecdotal, but their kids watch what they watch, or are into the shows that everyone is into. Even the younger kids watch stuff that you might say is more adult-oriented. No, not really young ones, and obviously I don't mean too adult-oriented. But my point is, I don't think you have to, shall we say, water down the show as much as I think they do in order to appeal to children. In fact, I think most kids like when something is a bit more complex and intriguing in nature. I think kids oftentimes get it more than we give them credit for. And so I think one thing the show could do is tip a bit more to the adult-oriented crowd and trust that the kids will continue to watch and will understand it and also like it maybe even more. Returning to the multiple episode story arc is also another thing I think they should consider, but like I said, I might go more into that in a separate video. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about all this. What do you think of The Bad Batch? Do you think everything with it, or with Star Wars animation, is okay behind the scenes? Or is there cause for concern? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.